Thank you so much for the question. I'm happy to talk a little bit about my background and what brought me to Girls Who Code. And I guess I'll start by saying, my passion for education and the work that I do now at Girls Who Code, it was absolutely shaped by my upbringing. I grew up partly in Brooklyn, New York, and also Kingston, Jamaica. And if I was in the room, I would ask if there are any Jamaicans in the room. And usually I would get at least 1 to 2 big ups. So I'm not sure who's in the audience, but I've never spoken at a place yet and not had at least one Jamaican. Am I accurate, Dr. JC? Is there at least one? Okay, I feel better now. So I grew up between Brooklyn, New York, and Kingston, Jamaica, and I was inspired by this legacy of really incredible, strong women in my family who devoted their lives to teaching, mentorship, and uplifting marginalized communities. And, just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of my family's history, back in Jamaica, my grandmother actually dropped out of school so she could work on the family farm after her mother died. And she was helping her father support her 7 younger siblings. And, I tell that story because even though her own education was cut short, she dropped out at around 6th grade. She managed to instill in her 4 children this idea that education could open the doors of opportunity. And that inspiration led to her daughter, my mom, who would go on to be the first in our family to go to college and to get a graduate degree. And you can see the dotted line all the way down to me. And, I come to this space first and foremost as an educator and an activist. And really, I have been, fighting for equity in education my entire career. And I'm really fortunate. I had a mom who taught me not just about the power of education, but the idea that you could go into spaces, see the type of work that was necessary, but wasn't happening, and to believe that you could have the agency to be the change that was needed. And so, before going to Girls Who Code, I spent 2 decades building educational pathways for young people at organizations like I Mentor, the New York City Department of Education, New Visions for Public Schools, and NYU. And, I'll give you one story that I often tell. When I worked with the New York City Department of Education, I led this team that worked on new schools. And at the time, the city was going to launch a first of its kind high school focused on software engineering. And it was going to be a part of the then mayor's plan to make New York City a tech hub. But, I also knew that the desire at the time was to make it a quote unquote screen school. So kids would have to test in order to be accepted. And I knew as an educator that relying solely on test scores would put kids of color at a disadvantage. And we know the reasons for that: poverty, disinvestment in low-income neighborhoods, racial bias in testing, among other issues. And so I actually fought against screening and rallied support for our decision to open the school to any student interested in learning programming. But I'll be honest, it was a battle. And people questioned whether or not poor Black and brown kids could even learn computer science. And this wasn't that long ago, but this was the conversation. But I can say happily that we won. And today, any teen in New York City interested in a computer science degree has a shot of attending the Academy for Software Engineering. And for the kids who are there, 95% of them are graduating on time. And, that lesson was a powerful one that carried me all the way through to the work I do now at Girls Who Code, where we focus on closing the gender gap in tech. And right now, we are very much leading the movement to inspire, educate, and equip students with the computing skills to take on 21st century opportunities. And just so you know, since launching in 2012, Girls Who Code has actually reached 850,000 students. And of that group, we have more than 330 college and workforce age alums. And more than half the girls we serve come from historically underrepresented groups. And they face barriers to access that keep them from success, even when they get through the pipeline. And so, I'll end by saying that, the work I do now, our mission supports a world where everyone can impact the future of tech.